All right, whenever you're ready, Angela.
Okay. So we are going to talk today about building a teacher team, which is key to MTSS and how you can create that change over time. And yeah, you can go ahead. Yeah, so just a welcome to anybody who is here. And we begin, of course, by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Pomsquamedy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1726. Acknowledge that the people of African descent have been in Nova Scotia for over 400 years and honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came before us to this land. And our work today is going to be seated in the inclusive education policy, which went into effect in September 2020. And we know that within that policy, MTSS is an expectation. So if we look at 5.8 from that policy, it states that every school will support student well-being and achievement through a multi-tiered systems of supports, or MTSS. And within that policy, there are clearly defined roles for all members of our system, including teachers. So today we're going to try to talk a little bit more about the teacher and how the teacher might be able to impact MTSS at their school. So to kind of get to that work, we're going to start with the reality of one of the schools from our own region and the process that they would have moved through in moving from a school that was maybe struggling a bit, and then how they moved through an MTSS process to overcome that. So the reality of the school is students are from a widely dispersed catchment and very isolated rural areas. So when they're in school, they see each other. And for many of them, when they go home, they are just going home to their family and they're not even seeing their peers outside of school often. We're very high poverty rates in this community, as well as low literacy rates for both their families and other community members. So historically, families that had lived there a long time and they themselves maybe had not had great success within the school system. And the staff who were at the school cared about the students, but was often a transient staff. So many people would go to this area, get their permanent contract and move along. And it was considered to be, sort of a challenging school for staff. So the other thing that was important, we thought we should mention, is that SEL lessons were being taught in classrooms as well as academics, but there would continue to be multiple playground incidents daily, and the sort of plan was to just send students to the office. So there wasn't really a carryover from the social emotional lessons into the daily operation of the school. So we're going to start with the data, and certainly MTSS requires us to look at data, and sometimes that can, people may think that's a bit of a bad word, but we know that data just tells us a story, and it's how we get a sense of where we are and where we can go and what's working for us. So we have some data to put in a breakout group, and there is also a link there for general questions to ask when examining data. And then just a couple of things to notice, to consider the report card marks in that data, as well as the 2016-17 provincial data, because that data would have been at the beginning of the start of this process. So before we had really taken on any work with MTSS and really digging in deep to what we were doing, where we kind of started. Yeah, and we need the collaborative culture because we all need support. So that is the power of the teacher support team. It's not just a renamed school-based team. So school-based team, we used to go, a teacher might come and say, oh, well, this student's not doing well. I want to have a referral. I want them to go to resource. I want them to go here, there, have this referral. And it was almost, and I mean, I was a teacher, so I can say it. It was almost sort of like, well, now you come take them. They're your problem. I don't have to worry about them. I'll worry about the rest of the students for whatever reason. And so the teacher support team is a real shift, and us all collectively coming together as a team to say, we are all responsible for all of them, whether or not they're in my room or your room. We are wrapping ourselves around all of the students in our building so they can all be successful, but we can't possibly have all of the answers. And one of the things, and I certainly know the teachers who are here would speak to, is that not one of us believed we had all of the answers, but we believed that collectively together we did, and that we could come together and problem solve. And if there was something within our own team that we were missing or didn't know or needed to know more about, we could access support throughout the region and other people. But that being by ourselves in our own room, not knowing the answer to something was okay. You weren't expected to. You can't possibly, none of us have the answers to support all students, but boy, as a team, we have a lot of expertise, um, and we are professionals. And so in other professions, when the doctor doesn't have the answer right away, they pull in other people and they talk to other people and they do some research, and we are the same. And so we had great success when we could come together around students and celebrate, here's what's going well, and here's what's not working so well for these particular students. What else can we try? And what other support do you need? So you're not alone in it. Yeah. So one of the big things we did was we reviewed the research as a staff. So sometimes we're so caught up in the moment of what we're doing that maybe we really need to look at what is the most effective thing that happens in schools for high achieving schools to overcome barriers, to leverage the power and put our time and energy on the things that have the greatest impact. So we looked heavily at schools that had overcome barriers, that went from a low achieving to high achieving. And as a principal, I really, really believe in the power of the teacher, and that if we all understand what makes the biggest difference and we put our energy into that, we can collectively make, a huge change for students. And we used student data to build a sense of urgency and question our beliefs. So looking at that data, as difficult as some of those conversations were, we came to a place where we stopped making excuses. So it wasn't about, well, that child's family or this is going on at home. And sometimes what we were inadvertently doing by trying to be nice is we were lowering the bar for students. So the student has all of these things going on at home. They have a lot of challenges. And so people would maybe pull back a little bit, not ask the difficult questions, accept work that maybe wasn't the student's best, not give the feedback, and to say, okay, so here's the next step, here's the success criteria, here's what you can do now to go a little further. And so by doing that, we were actually creating that gap. We were lowering the expectations and we were not giving the high quality feedback that those students in particular, probably needed more than anybody. They needed us to help them. They were not going to get that kind of feedback and support outside of school. And so we really had to maximize the time we had in the building to really be impactful and hold them to high expectations with the support. And that had to happen across all of our staff. So we held the students to high expectations, but we also held each other to really high expectations around believing that no matter which teacher they were in front of, that they were getting high quality teaching and feedback every day. Yeah. So one of the first things I think for a school to ask, and even as a teacher in your school, does your school have a shared vision? And is there a sense of urgency that these students right now, this is their time, this is their one chance they get to do grade 3, so they can't wait for us to figure it out? Are we operating with a sense of urgency to move them forward? And we used an analogy of a pool, that at school we weren't just there to be the lifeguard. So the lifeguard would keep them alive all day and send them home at the end of the day and everybody was still alive. We were like the coach, the swimming coach. So when they come every day, they learn a new stroke or they learn a new little something to be a better swimmer by the end of that day. And that was our job, not just to keep everybody safe and alive and send them home at the end of the day, but to create a shift in their learning and in their growth so that we were having an impact. So we really believe that all students can learn and deserve to be challenged and would achieve at or above expected levels. That became our goal. So the past student success plan, like school goals, often we would say, to meet the provincial benchmark, whatever that was provincially. So if it was 60% of students meeting the math expectation for grade 3, that's what we were shooting for, was to be at the provincial standard. And so we talked a lot about, is 60%, is that good enough? What is good enough? If we have 10 children and we say 60%, that means 4 are unsuccessful. And would we be okay with that? Are we okay if one of our children is in the 4 or the 40% that's not successful? And of course we aren't. So we set a really high expectation for ourselves that we wanted them all. We wanted 100% of our students meeting the expectations in literacy and math. And that's what we were shooting for. And we were certainly told that that was a crazy goal at first, but we held to it, and we tried really hard, and we changed the way in which we worked. So it wasn't that we did necessarily more work. We tried to get rid of a lot of things that were low leverage, low impact things that were happening, and came to an agreement as a school to say, you know what, that really doesn't have an impact. You might have done that for 10 years, but is that really having the impact that we needed to? No. Let's get rid of those things. Let's tighten up our time. Let's really align our practice. So as they move from class to class, grade to grade, we have some consistent expectations. And let's really, really focus on our use of our time around high quality teaching and experiences for students. So we couldn't wait. And for those provincial results was the other piece. In order to know what our impact was, we had to measure impact every week, every month. We couldn't wait until the end of grade 3 or 6 to be like, oh, guess what? Half of our students are not meeting expectations. So we operate on the belief that those sort of results, when they come back, should just confirm for us what we already knew. They shouldn't be a surprise. They should give us information about where maybe our expectation was not high enough, or a particular area of the curriculum that we needed to focus on a little bit more. But we wanted to believe that when our students wrote those assessments, that we knew who was going to achieve and what struggles, because we were watching them every week and keeping track of that and responding. And that work really is your student success plan work. So we agree all students can learn. So what are we doing to ensure they do? So where do you even begin when you're in that situation as a school where you have so many of your students not meeting expectations, so many students struggling with so many things? How do you start? And that's why this is an overtime process. It's not a fix in a day, in a week, in a month. And there's layers to sort of addressing this problem. So yeah, we're going to do, I think, Brian, there's another breakout group here. So just to think about with your group, some key steps that you have taken to implement the inclusive education policy through MTSS. So what evidence of success do you have? What are your challenges? Just as you're thinking about all of this, what are some things that you think have already happened or current challenges that you might have? Okay, so lots of things to think about. And I know that for us, like, and Brian was just saying in our breakout group about, the sharing of assessment can be very tricky and uncomfortable sometimes because we own those assessments and that work we've done with students. So one of the things that really made a huge difference for us, both in building the collective efficacy, which we know there's so much power in that, and also in beginning to share students, was the use of data wall. As a way to look at data together with all of our students so that nobody was kind of missed or, we saw every single student on that data wall, and we were able to track very carefully where everybody was moving and who wasn't moving, and set short-term goals. So that data really helped us to personalize and have individual conversations as a whole entire school team around all of our students. So celebrating the success of the students who were moving forward, and the success of the teacher team who was working with those students, because it was the teacher, it's the teaching that is making that happen. And so it's really important for teachers. It's hard work. So it was really, really important that we called our data wall when we first put them up. We didn't call them data wall, specifically called it a celebration wall on purpose, because it was about celebrating the growth. It was about celebrating the work of the teachers that were having that happen and the students who were moving forward. And there were some things that were important. So the location, it had to be in a place where we were seeing it all the time. It has no impact if it's not in a place where you're talking about it and looking at it and getting excited about the change that you're making. It had to be co-created. So it's not something that one teacher puts up or a couple of teachers or the principal. It is everybody in there together, coming with their information, their data, deciding how to organize it, and collectively getting that up on the wall and deciding how it's going to be used. So coming up with some norms around when will we be updating it? When are we coming back to it again? What is the criteria we're going to use and look for? What else might we need? What are we missing? And then all the conversations that come from that, that then can guide you towards an intervention plan, and it will evolve over time. So our data walls over the course of the years changed. We just sometimes it was messy. It was like, okay, how are we going to do this? And people will have different ideas. And the idea was we would just try something. We didn't have to have it all figured out. Sometimes you have a vision and a plan. I had a long-term vision of where I was hoping we could go, but you can't have it completely mapped out because you're dealing with children and you're dealing with people. And so it's messy. So it evolves over time as you get more strategic and everybody's learning a little bit more and everybody's having input and owning that data. It starts to evolve and shape itself into becoming more and more useful or more and more in depth. So at first, we focused on reading. And then they grew to looking at more and more pieces of data. So we looking at writing on a very frequent time frame, looking at high leverage pieces in math, and then looking at attendance and behavior and all other kinds of pieces that we added to it. But the importance is that you're building that collective efficacy. So it's where you're seeing the evidence, and what you see in that Hattie's clip is it's believing you can and feeding it with the evidence that you are, to see, okay, look at what we're doing, look at what we're doing. And starts to really build momentum and excitement. And if a student is stuck or there's a struggle, that's okay. What can we do now? And so it becomes built upon problem solving to just try to say, okay, there's some things are challenging, and how can we come together? And do we need to take this group? Do we need to go back to teacher support team? Our team has tried all of these things, and so it supports building a teacher team. So a P to 2 team that's working with all of those students in P to 2. And if they have a group of students, they're not moving forward, to then say, okay, let's go back to the larger team. Let's go back to teacher support team. We've tried this, this, and this. What else can we try? So not really feeling like they have to give up, but feeling like we can do it. We just need a new thing to try. We tried this and this and this, and it's okay that it didn't work. Doesn't matter. What else can we try? Yeah, so our first data wall, this was the first one that went up. You'll see celebration wall there. So it's how you use it to create the change, right? That's the important part. And so in MTSS, we believe that 80% can meet with success at the classroom level, right in tier 1 practice. So when 80% of the students are meeting with success, what happens is then the other 20 are the students who are receiving additional tier 2 supports. So when our data first went up, and as you would have saw back in that provincial assessment data, we had a really skewed, that didn't work for us. We had more like 80% of students who were not at the expected level when this first reading data went up. So, as a principal, I had a big plan that we were going to move into an intervention model school-wide, and we would do these intervention blocks 3 times a week where we would regroup students and to try to move them forward. But because we had 80% of our students basically 2 years behind, it was an impossible problem to try to service that many students with intervention. So what we really recognized is we had to address our tier 1 practice. So we had to really dial in and figure out what happens at tier 1 in every classroom, so we can start shifting what's happening at the classroom level so that we can get to a place where we have a smaller number of students who need targeted intervention. So the only way to really, one of the big pieces is using that frequent assessment to catch things early around what was essential. And right now, one of the things that's super lined up for us, a good thing that came out of the pandemic, was that the curriculum has now been dialed into those foundational essential outcomes for us. So we started this work prior to those outcomes. And so part of our work was first to really get clear on what's essential. What must they know at primary, grade 1, grade 2, by the middle of primary, by the end of primary, by the beginning of grade 1, by the middle of grade 1, where should they be and what's essential, so we could really get tight on assessment at the classroom level to catch them early. We couldn't wait years down the road and then try to intervene because the gaps are just too big. Yeah. So this is basically what I just spoke about why we started with tier one. So when you have a real tier one issue where you have most of your students struggling or a large percentage, no amount of intervention or support at tier two and tier three is going to be able to address that. So we really needed to get in at the classroom level, which is tier one. Everybody's in tier one. Nobody misses tier one. And what can we do to be super effective at tier one that will have an impact? Yeah, and so the indicators of a tier one concern, and these are just some bullets around things that will tell you if you really have a tier one place where you need to start. And so for us, we knew we had to because we had less than 75 to 80% of our students at or above grade level where we needed them to be on the benchmarks that were essential. We had inconsistent achievement and performance across classrooms, and grades. So sometimes students will do really well in one classroom, but their counterparts, the students in the classroom across the hall, are meeting at a different level. And some of that comes from the inconsistencies, the variability within expectations. So if I have a teacher with really high expectations, then I may be performing really strong in my writing because my teacher's really teaching to and giving me a lot of feedback and showing me exemplars and where I need to be. And if there's happens to be a teacher across the hall that they don't think that that is what the expectation is, that just because they haven't talked about it. And sometimes, if we're in a room on our own and we're not talking about what is the expectations, what should students be able to do, what could they do the year before, we inadvertently have these sort of peaks and valleys that come up. And so we spent a lot of time in this process talking across grade levels around, well, if they can do this in primary, then what should that look like by grade 1? There should be a steady climb of expectations so that we continue to raise the bar for students. So these are just some indicators that will start to tell you if you really need to just, as a school, talk about, well, what's happening every day in our classrooms for all students so that most can achieve right at the classroom level. Yeah. So year one was all about tier one. So the key to improve student learning is to ensure more good teaching in more classrooms more of the time. And so we can't stress enough the impact that tier one has at the classroom level every day. So it's getting tight that every day we were like, workshop model, not negotiable. Every single day we do an hour of learning to read, an hour of learning to write, and our 90-minute math block, not negotiable. Those are essentials. They have to happen, particularly at elementary, because we have to get those fundamental skills. We know the research coming out of grade 2, if students are struggling in reading, they will often go on and continue to struggle. So how do we maximize the time we have to get these essential foundational skills in right out of the gate and catch it really early so that we're doing intervention for students right away, middle of primary. We're not waiting until we get our provincial result back in grade 3 that says, whoops, and then trying to go back and fix that. So yeah, tier one, really important to embrace, value, and partner with the students and the families in the community. So we did a lot of work in building relationships with families and building trust with families to talk about the importance of being at school, starting right out of the gate in the morning. That's when your child's learning to read. And so if they come an hour late, you've missed learn to read part of the day. And why is learning to read important? What doors does it open for your child? How does it impact them as they move through school? Um, there was a lot of parents there, and I see one of them sitting in that picture there, who they didn't really necessarily value or trust what we were doing, but we brought them in. We fed them. We brought them in after school and on evenings with food and with sessions around. We had literacy nights. We did all kinds of things to try to engage with them early around the importance of working with us on some of these foundational and fundamental things. Um, and we worked hard on the research around every child we know needs at least one adult in their school that they are connected with. So we got really intentional. We found out what do we know about our students. So we did things with class lists where we looked at those things that you see there in the bullets. What do we really know? Who's attending, who's not, and actually doing something about that. So saying, everybody take one. If there's a student there that we don't know about, that is sometimes they're just the quiet one, sometimes they're no trouble, but we maybe don't have a strong connection with them. So we were really looking to say, how do we ensure that every student feels they belong in our school and that we know and they know that we see them? So it's sometimes we believe that we've made the connection, but the child has to know that we know and we understand where they're coming from and that they feel the connection back with us. So we got really intentional on those pieces. And we also got really intentional on that we are all responsible for every child in that building, not just the one that's in your classroom that comes to you first thing in the morning, but no matter which child's in the hallway, that we talk to them, we greet them, the four before the door, everybody at their door in the morning at arrival, everybody out at bus stop in the morning when the students are coming in. So starting really strong right away from the minute they come in the door until they leave at the end of the day. Yeah. So tier one as a school. So this is sort of what I spoke about before. It's the collective tier one that make the difference. So if we have things going really well and then we lower an expectation for something, we're always sort of trying to play catch up. So we really tried to get clear and really work together around what is the steady climb of expectations for students. If they could do something on their own a couple of months ago or the year before, well, then we need to hold them accountable to that and say, I know what you can do and you are capable. And so, how do we continue to support when and push in with short term support when they need and then fade back out when they don't need us anymore to fade those prompts away? So it's a huge project. So I called it here eating the elephant because it's like one little bite at a time as a school and moving this sort of process forward. So the first year, we really focused on building trust and a collaborative culture with each other. So if you look at that slide, I tried to capture there some of the key things that we did in that first year to really talk about how are we coming together as a school. And that first year, we saw huge results even in that first year. And if you see the provincial data for the next year, you can see it already starting to go up provincially. But we knew that because we were tracking how students were doing carefully ourselves through our data walls, through attendance. We knew it was getting better. You could just tell when you walk down the hall that the engagement level was up. So we got rid of the busy work, the boring stuff. We raised the expectations so students could see that they were being successful and we celebrated that. And so the gains don't take that long when you start to really dial in on what's really effective. So we worked hard that first year on reading and on workshop model. We worked hard on building relationships and we really tried to get rid of some ineffective things. So stuff that was just really busy work, time wasters, out. Like sheet work. And we even had one classroom where I heard roll call one by one that September. And we don't have time for that. We need to get down to what we need to be doing. So we just really got tight on what was effective and ineffective practice and came to an agreement around that. And we started small with math because we had to go, it's important to go deep and build consistency across the school rather than trying to do everything at once. So we got reading really under control and we moved a little piece of math in. And then as the years went on, we went deeper into other areas. But that just gives you a snapshot of sort of that first year. Yeah, and this is another video, and maybe we can put this one in the chat too. Brian's already on it, which shows that inside outside circle activity being done at another school and how they took ownership of the students and what they did with that. So it's a nice video that shows it in action. Yeah, and then year 2 was really bridging, from tier 1 into tier 2. So the statement that's from the inclusive education policy there, every student can learn with enough time, practice, and equitable and responsive teaching. That statement, really embodies what we believed and stood behind with the intervention model. So as we moved more students into the window where they should be of expectation, then we had a smaller number of students left that we could really target intervention for. And we got really tight as a school on who was the best person to do intervention for a particular group of students for a short period of time. So, yeah. So two beliefs here for our intervention model that we moved into is that we accepted responsibility to ensure high levels of learning for every child. So John Hattie, who I spoke about earlier, whose research in visible learning, um, really says typical school effect: 1 year just getting older, 0.1, 1 year of instruction, 0.3. So the average student who's alive and attends is expected to improve at a rate of 0.4. But we know the research says responsive intervention, so short-term, flexible, timely targeted intervention, 1.04 effect. And it actually is overcomes and is more powerful than the effect that poverty might have on a child at school. So we knew that that, along with collective efficacy, were the two huge drivers that could make a difference for student success. And we also assumed that all students can learn at high levels. And so we have to ask ourselves, does all mean all? We mean boys, we mean marginalized students, students living in poverty, students who are not first language English speakers, students who may be struggling with lots of struggles at home and things that are, considered to be barriers that we might have allowed to get in the way of a high level of expectation before. So to what extent are those two beliefs embodied by our staff? So we really had to ask ourselves, are we intervening effectively? Are our interventions timely? Are they targeted? Are they effective? Are they having the effect they should? And are we really making sure we're getting to all of our students? Yeah. So the underlying premise that schools should not delay providing help for struggling students until they fall far enough behind to qualify for resource and more intense programs. So this intervention model that we ran with was very different than the old traditional model where, after a year or so or a couple years or the same, they would go to school-based team and be referred on for resource. We also didn't mean reading recovery when we talked about intervention. That was one of our tier 2 interventions, but we wanted intervention long before. And we did get to a place for a couple of years there where once we got really tight, where we were in a situation where we were like, we don't really have anybody who needs reading recovery. Like, we have worked ourselves out of this because we were intervening both at tier 1 and tier 2 really timely and targeted. So that model required an all hands on deck, everybody involved. So we started with 3 blocks a week for half an hour where we regrouped our students based on the criteria we were looking for reading. And then we brought on writing and math eventually. And we regrouped students across the whole school. So even though, let's say, Marina, who's here today, who was one of our primary and grade 1 teachers, for example, might not be that child's classroom teacher, she might have a student from Shara's room, but Marina's going to work on a reading intervention in a small group targeted reading intervention, and Shara is going to take a group of students and she's doing a math intervention with some other students. So we really collectively shared our students across teachers, and we looked at teacher strength and what is that person's real skill set. So Stephanie, social emotional, and as our behavior support teacher, worked with students on small group, really targeted pieces around that they needed that were interfering with their classroom learning sometimes. So we had all kinds of ways of looking at students and saying, what is their very next step that they need to get in place so that they can move forward? And so that piece really, it built our team, our collective responsibility. So if a student was struggling, it wasn't about who their teacher was in their classroom. There were multiple people working with these students who were coming together then to say, well, I've tried this with them, you've tried that, here's what worked for me with them. And so it really increased our use of what we're calling teacher support team in the inclusive education policy, because we were sharing students all the time. And it was everybody. It was our custodian had a student, I had a group of students, so everybody had a group of students at that time. And some people had really, really large groups of students because they didn't need intervention, and we were able to provide enrichment opportunities for those students who were already super exceeding where they needed to be at tier one. So we could do some really high leverage, like really push some writing or do some really interesting STEM activities, which Morgan, who's here, would lead. So there was all kinds of creative ways, but it was coming together as a team, as a school, to say and what happened is we all knew all of the students and they knew we all knew them. So on that wellness survey, I heard many students say there's a question there where it was like, do you have one adult in the school that you feel you can talk to or are connected with? And many of them would say, I have lots of people. There's lots of people here I can talk to because I see this person, this person, this person, this person. So it became much more of a team overall. Yeah. So we really got down to this question, which is a tough one. But it doesn't matter which teacher your child has at our school, your child needs extra time and support. We guarantee they will receive it. So the only way we could do that is we had to rethink the way in which we were intervening. The old version of, oh, you're on the resource caseload, and here's your time 3 times a week where you go for resource, and you might be there for the whole year. We couldn't operate that way. We needed intervention to be timely and focused and flexible for what you needed right now for 4 to 6 weeks, and then out of that intervention group. Or if we weren't moving you out, we need to talk about what's happening in that intervention group, and is it the right intervention, or what else does this student need? Yeah, so frequent ongoing assessment is a key, because you have to know what you're looking for, and we have to be able to catch early who's learning it. And if one thing we found is sometimes we weren't sure what should they be learning, to what degree, what is success look like. And so if the teachers don't know, the students can't know. And so the work began with, first, as a teacher team, talking about, well, what do we expect? And that data, while you're seeing there, is a writing one where we did a writing rubric from students' writing samples. That was probably our first time we did a writing one, where we were trying to up our bar around writing expectations. And what we found is that after a couple of years, what we thought were high expectations were not. So we even upped our expectations on ourselves around what we thought students were able to do. So these key questions we asked, there's a student version of these questions, which we asked students, and we use these for our guiding questions for all of our work, really around both tier 1 and tier 2. What do we expect our students to know and be able to do? So in relation to the curriculum, what does success look like? What's the criteria? What are the learning targets? How will we know who learned it? So that really shifted the conversation from, well, I taught it. It didn't, oh, great if you taught it, but more importantly, who learned it? So is there evidence there from the ongoing assessment around the criteria we agreed to that says who learned it? And then what are we going to do for the students who've already learned it? What's their next step? And what about those who haven't yet? So those are the students who either go into small group instruction in tier 1, or they moved into our school-wide intervention model to get some extra time and extra practice, and maybe somebody else trying a new strategy for how to teach it, so that we could then move on. Yeah. And so these are just some key questions and things to think about when you're doing assessment. And we're almost out of time, I'm just realizing. So these are just some guiding questions, some things that we did as a staff to co-create and co-plan. You'll see the co all the way through, that we did these things together. So it really took the onus off one person figuring this out, and during our any collaborative time we had, staff meetings, co-planning time, these are the things that we focused on around essential skills. And then there's year 2 and year 3, where you'll see how we built upon what we were doing in year 1. You can probably look at that on your own if you want to go into that. This is just an example of the steps we used as a school, working through writing and math, using assessment to align our practice and then know where our students were, and then how we move students in and out of intervention. So it's kind of just laid out for you there step by step. We did. Yeah. So we probably don't have much time for this one. I don't know, Brian, if there's time to quickly just show kind of the data at the end of the 3 years where we landed as a school, because it did work. Yeah, so you'll see this is 3 years after. So these students, this would be the grade 6 results that you'd see here would be the students who you would have seen their results in grade 3, where there was maybe 40% of them meeting. And what ended up happening is we were able to get in some of our areas 100% in math in some of our places, but we had a huge shift. And one of the things we noticed when we first looked at our data is we never had any of our students ever meeting at a level 4 on a provincial assessment. It didn't happen. We did not have them. And if you look now, we've got a pretty significant group of students meeting at level 4, not just meeting, but exceeding, and then at level 3. And the blue was, I believe that's the provincial or the regional. I can't see it there, but we're the green. So we were for the most part meeting and exceeding and everything.
Regional in the blue.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So it was making a huge difference. And you know, I don't know if the teachers want to speak a little bit about their experience in this, because I think it's important that people know that the teachers, well, you speak for yourselves. How did you feel about the process and what happened?
Hi, it's Shara. I just want to say one thing, and I know that sometimes when we approach this work, it seems like it's more work, but actually, what we came to realize is it's just working in a different way. So it's not additional work, it's not additional prep time, it's just using your time in a different way, and maybe instead of, I know. Marina can probably speak to this, but instead of, staying after school to prep each day by yourself, you stay a little bit longer on one day a week where you all meet together and prep for the week. So it's not additional; it's just working in a different way, and I think that's one of the biggest hurdles for teachers is making that shift. But it is so much easier actually after you're doing it for a while, and it's so beneficial for the students. So, thank you.
Yeah. So I'm Marina. And just to piggyback on what Shara said, and she kind of touched on that. So I am the primary 1 teacher, and I have been for, I think, 7 years now. And the way that we eventually got to, we decided on what our essentials were at each grade level, but then we, and this work doesn't get done like overnight. This was a process, obviously. So that's the other important thing to remember when people become overwhelmed. But the primary to 2 team eventually got to a place where we stayed after school 1 day a week, and really paid attention to what those essentials were from primary to 2 and what it looked like at each grade level. And we mapped out our weeks. We timed assessments together. We had conversations around what have we not looked at recently, what needs to be updated. And it, like Shara said, it is just so much easier to do it that way. And in general, Shara, you said this too, but I found the kids were, well, we know because our incidences of behavior went down, engagement went up, and kids were happier and they were engaged. And staff too.
So I'm Stephanie, and I am one of the behavior support teachers at our school, and I was involved in all of the process for the academics, in regard to, what are the essentials. So staff meetings and other times that we collaborated, it wasn't, oh, I do behavior support, so I'm not going to be involved in this. No, everybody had a hand in it, and everybody knew the kids, and everybody took that responsibility to meet the kids, where they are, and support that either socially, emotionally, or academically. And yeah, it was fabulous.
Yeah. So thank you. I think it is really important to have the teacher voice, and you can't, I mean, this is all about teachers and teaching, and I will always say I'm a teacher first. It's the best job that there is. But really, like, it is about a team coming together and working through this process together. And in the end, it's super effective for students, but also I think really empowering for teachers to see the effect of what they're doing. And sometimes when we're not looking at our impact, the job can become quite overwhelming, but when you start to measure and really see those little incremental pieces of growth, it's super powerful for everybody. So thank you.